Namaste. Welcome back. This is the second part of the summer reading series. I'm reading from Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart. I'm reading the second chapter. But before we begin that, I want to just show you how to do the finger holds. It's a hand mudra, and you just take your right hand, cradle and hug your left thumb, and you can relax your hands down to your lap. You want to just hold softly, breathing for about 2 minutes per finger. You do each finger on the left hand, then you switch and you do the left hand cradles and hugs the right thumb. You do each finger, and you can put a timer on, however you're comfortable doing it. I'm going to be reading from chapter 2, When Things Fall Apart. When things fall apart and we're on the verge of we know not what, the test of each of us is to stay on that brink and not concretize. The spiritual journey is not about heaven and finally getting to a place that's really swell. Gampo Abbey is a vast place where the sea and the sky melt into each other. The horizon extends infinitely, and in this vast space float seagulls and ravens. The setting is like a huge mirror that exaggerates the sense of there being nowhere to hide. Also, since it is a monastery, there are very few means of escape. No lying, no stealing, no alcohol, no sex, no exit. Gampo Abbey was a place to which I had been longing to go. Trungpa Rinpoche asked me to be the director of the abbey, so I finally found myself there. Being there was an invitation to test my love of a good challenge, because in the first years it was like being boiled alive. What happened to me when I got to the abbey was that everything fell apart. All the ways I shield myself, all the ways I delude myself, all the ways I maintain my well-polished self-image, all of it fell apart. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't manipulate the situation. My style was driving everyone else crazy, and I couldn't find anywhere to hide. I'd always thought of myself as a flexible, obliging person who was well-liked by almost everyone. I've been able to carry this illusion throughout most of my life. During my early years at the Abbey, I discovered that I'd been living in some kind of misunderstanding. It wasn't that I didn't have good qualities, it was just that I was not quite the ultimate golden girl. I'd so much invested in that image of myself, and it just wasn't holding together anymore. All of my unfinished business was exposed vividly and accurately in living technicolor, not only to myself, but to everyone else. Everything that I had not been able to see about myself before was suddenly dramatized. And if that weren't enough, others were free with their feedback about me and what I was doing. It was so painful that I wondered if I would ever be happy again. I felt that bombs were being dropped on me, and almost continuously, with self-deceptions exploding all around. In a place where there was so much practice and study going on, I could not get lost in trying to justify myself and blame others. That kind of exit was not available. A teacher visited me during this time, and I remember her saying to me, "When you have good friends with yourself, when you've made good friends with yourself, your situation will be more friendly too." I had learned this lesson before, and I knew that it was only way to go. I used to have a sign pinned up on my wall that read, "Only to the extent that we expose ourselves over and over to annihilation can that which is indestructible be found in us." Somehow, even before I heard that Buddhist teaching, I knew that this was a spirit of true awakening. It was all about letting go of everything. Nevertheless, when the bottom falls out and we can't find anything to grasp, it hurts a lot. It's like the Naropa Institute motto, "Love of truth puts you on the spot." We might have some romantic view of what that means, but when we are nailed with the truth, we suffer. We look in the bathroom mirror, and there we are with our pimples, our aging face, our lack of kindness, our aggression, and timidity, all that stuff. This is where tenderness comes in. When things are shaky and nothing is working, we might realize that we're on the verge of something. We might realize that this is a very vulnerable and tender place, and that tenderness can go either way. We can shut down and feel resentful, or we can touch in on that throbbing quality. There is definitely something tender and throbbing about groundlessness. It's a kind of testing, the kind of testing that spiritual warriors need in order to awaken their hearts. Sometimes it's because of illness or death that we find ourselves in this place. We experience a sense of loss, loss of our loved ones, loss of our youth, loss of our life. I had a friend dying of AIDS. Before I was leaving for a trip, we were talking. He said, I didn't want this, and I hated this, and I was terrified of this, but it turns out that this illness has been my greatest gift, he said. Now every moment is so precious to me. All the people in my life are so precious to me. My whole life means so much to me. Something had really changed, and he felt ready for his death. Something that was horrifying and scary had turned into a gift. Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all this to happen, room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. When we think that something's going to bring us pleasure, we don't know what's really going to happen. When we think something's going to give us misery, we don't know. Letting there be room for not knowing is the most important doing of all. We try to do what we think is going to help, but we don't know. We never know if we're going to fall flat or sit up tall. When there's a big disappointment, we don't know if that's the end of the story. It may be just the beginning of a great adventure. I read somewhere about a family who had only one son. They were very poor. This son was extremely precious to them, and the only thing that mattered to his family was that he bring them some financial support and prestige. Then he was thrown from a horse and crippled. It seemed at the end of their lives. 2 weeks after that, the army came into the village and took away all the healthy, strong men to fight in the war, and this young man was allowed to stay behind and take care of his family. Life is like that. We don't know anything. We call something bad, we call it good, but really we just don't know. When things fall apart and we're on the verge of we know not what, the test for us is to stay on that brink and not concretize. The spiritual journey is not about heaven and finally getting to a place that's really swell. In fact, that way of looking at things is what keeps us miserable, thinking that we can find some lasting pleasure and avoid pain in what Buddhism calls samsara, a hopeless cycle that goes round and round endlessly and causes us to suffer greatly. The very first noble truth of the Buddha points out that suffering is inevitable for human beings as long as we believe that things last, that they don't disintegrate, that we can be counted on to satisfy our hunger for security. From this point of view, the only time we ever know what's really going on is when the rug's being pulled out and we can't find anywhere to land. We use these situations either to wake ourselves up or to put ourselves to sleep. Right now, in the very instant of groundlessness, is the seed of taking care of those who need our care and of discovering our goodness. I remember so vividly a day in early spring when my whole reality gave out on me. Although it was before I'd heard any Buddhist teaching, it was what some would call a genuine spiritual experience. It happened when my husband told me he was having an affair. We lived in northern New Mexico. I was standing in front of our adobe house drinking a cup of tea. I heard the car drive up and the door bang shut. Then he walked around the corner, and without warning, he told me that he was having an affair and wanted a divorce. I remember the sky and how huge it was. I remember the sound of the river and the stream rising up from my tea. The steam rising up from my tea. There was no time, no thought, there was nothing, just the light and a profound, limitless stillness. Then I regrouped and I picked up a stone and threw it at him. When anyone asks me how I got involved in Buddhism, I always say it was because I was so angry with my husband. The truth is that he saved my life. When that marriage fell apart, I tried hard, very, very hard, to go back to some kind of comfort, to go back to some kind of security, some kind of familiar resting place. Fortunately for me, I could never pull it off. Instinctively, I knew that annihilation of my old dependent, clinging self was the only way to go. That's when I pinned that sign up on my wall. Life is a good teacher and a good friend. Things are always in transition. If we could only realize it, nothing ever sums itself up the way that we like to dream about. The off-center, in-between state is an ideal situation, a situation in which we don't get caught and we can open our hearts and minds beyond limit. It's a very tender, non-aggressive, open-ended state of affairs. To stay with that shakiness, to stay with a broken heart, with a rumbling stomach, with the feeling of hopelessness and wanting to get revenge, that is the path of true awakening. Sticking with the uncertainty, getting the knack of relaxing in the midst of chaos, learning not to panic, this is a spiritual path. Getting the knack of catching ourselves, of greatly and compassionately catching ourselves, is the path of a warrior. We catch ourselves 1,000,000,000 times as once again, whether we like it or not, we harden into resentment, bitterness, righteousness, indignation, harden in any way, even into a sense of relief, a sense of inspiration. Every day we could think about the aggression in the world in New York, Los Angeles, Halifax, Taiwan, Beirut, Kuwait, Somalia, Iraq, everywhere. All over the world, everybody always strikes out at the enemy, and the pain escalates forever. Every day we could reflect on this and ask ourselves, am I going to add to the aggression in the world? Every day, at the moment, when things get edgy, we can just ask ourselves, am I going to practice peace or am I going to practice war? That ends chapter 2. Hi, I'm reading now from chapter 3. When Things Fall Apart is the name of the book. The author is Pema Chodron. Title of chapter 3, This is the very moment. This very moment is the perfect teacher. And I'm waiting for a delivery, and I need this. We can meet our match with a poodle or with a raging guard dog, but the interesting question is, what happens next? Generally speaking, we regard discomfort in any form as bad news, but for practitioners or spiritual warriors, people who have certain hunger to know what is true, feelings like disappointment, embarrassment, irritation, resentment, anger, jealousy, and fear, instead of being bad news, are actually very clear moments that teach us where it is that we're holding back. They teach us to perk up and lean in when we feel we'd rather collapse and back away. They're like messengers that show us with terrifying clarity exactly where we're stuck. This very moment is the perfect teacher, and lucky for us, it's with us wherever we are. Those events and people in our lives who trigger our unresolved issues could be regarded as good news. We don't have to go hunting for anything. We don't need to try to create situations in which we reach our limit. They occur all by themselves, with clockwork regularity. Each day, we're given many opportunities to open up or shut down. The most precious opportunity presents itself when we come to the place where we think we can't handle whatever is happening. It's too much. It's gone too far. We feel bad about ourselves. There's no way we can manipulate the situation to make ourselves come out looking good. No matter how hard we try, it just won't work. Basically, life has just nailed us. It's as if you just looked at yourself in the mirror and you saw a gorilla. The mirror's there, it's showing you, and what you see looks bad. You try to angle the mirror so you look a little better, but no matter what you do, you still look like a gorilla. That's being nailed by life, the place where you have no choice except to embrace what's happening or push it away. Most of us do not take these situations as teachings. We automatically hate them. We run like crazy. We use all kinds of ways to escape. All addictions stem from this moment when we meet our edge and we just can't stand it. We feel we have to soften it, pat it with something, and we become addicted to whatever it is that seems to ease the pain. In fact, the rampant materialism that we see in the world stems from this moment. There are so many ways that we've been dreamt up to entertain us away from the moment, soften its hard edge, deaden it so we don't have to feel the full impact of the pain that arises when we cannot manipulate the situation to make us come out looking fine. Meditation is an invitation to notice where we reach our limit and not get carried away by hope and fear. Through meditation, we're able to see clearly what's going on with our thoughts and emotions, and we can also let them go. What's encouraging about meditation is that even if we shut down, we can no longer shut down in ignorance. We see very clearly that we're closing off, that in itself begins to illuminate the darkness of ignorance. We're able to see how we run and hide and keep ourselves busy so that we never have to let our hearts be penetrated, and we're also able to see how we could open and relax. Basically, disappointment, embarrassment, and all these places where we just cannot feel good are a sort of death. We've just lost our ground completely. We are unable to hold it together and feel that we're on top of things. Rather than realizing that it takes death for there to be birth, we just fight against the fear of death. Reaching our limit is not some kind of punishment. It's actually a sign of health, that when we meet the place where we are about to die, we feel fear and trembling. A further sign of health is that we don't become undone by fear and trembling, but we take it as a message that it's time to stop struggling and look directly at what's threatening us. Things are disappointment and anxiety are messengers telling us that we're about to go into unknown territory. Our bedroom closet can be unknown territory for some of us. For others, it's going into outer space. What evokes hope and fear for me is different from what brings it up for you. My aunt reaches her limit when I move a lamp in her living room. My friend completely loses it when she has to move to a new apartment. My neighbor is afraid of heights. It doesn't really matter what causes us to reach our limit. The point is that sooner or later it happens to all of us. The first time I met Trungpa Rinpoche was with a class of 4th graders who asked him a lot of questions about growing up in Tibet and about escaping from the Chinese communists into India. One boy asked him if he was ever afraid. Rinpoche answered that his teacher had encouraged him to go to places like graveyards that scared him and to experiment with approaching things he didn't like. Then he told a story about traveling with his attendants to a monastery he'd never seen before. As they neared the gates, he saw a large guard dog with huge teeth and red eyes. It was growling ferociously and struggling to get free from the chain that held it. The dog seemed desperate to attack them. As Rinpoche got closer, he could see its bluish tongue and spittle spraying from its mouth. They walked past the dog, keeping their distance, and entered the gate. Suddenly the chain broke, and the dog rushed at them. The attendants screamed and froze in terror. Rinpoche turned and ran as fast as he could straight at the dog. The dog was so surprised that he put his tail between his legs and ran away. We can meet our match with the poodle or with the raging guard dog, but the interesting question is, what happens next? The spiritual journey involves going beyond hope and fear, stepping into unknown territory, continually moving forward. The most important aspect of being on the spiritual path may be just to keep moving. Usually when we reach our limit, we feel exactly like Rinpoche's attendants and freeze in terror. Our bodies freeze, and so do our minds. How do we work with our minds when we meet our match? Rather than indulge or reject our experience, we can somehow let the energy of the emotion, the quality of what we're feeling, pierce us to the heart. This is easier said than done, but it's a noble way to live. It's definitely the path of compassion, the path of cultivating human bravery and kind-heartedness. In the teaching of Buddhism, we hear about egolessness. It sounds difficult to grasp. What are they talking about anyway? When the teachings are about neurosis, however we feel right at home. That's something we really understand. But egolessness? When we reach our limit, if we aspire to know that place fully, which is to say that we aspire to neither indulge nor repress, a hardness in us will dissolve. We will be softened by the sheer force of whatever energy arises, the energy of anger, the energy of disappointment, the energy of fear. When it's not solidified in one direction or another, that very energy pierces us to the heart, and it opens us. This is the discovery of egolessness. It's when all of our usual schemes fall apart. Reaching our limit is like finding a doorway to sanity and the unconditional goodness of humanity rather than meeting an obstacle or punishment. The safest and most nurturing place to begin working this way is during formal meditation. On the cushion, we begin to get the hang of not indulging or repressing and of what it feels like to let the energy just be there. That is why it's so good to meditate every single day and continue to make friends with our hopes and fears again and again. This sows the seeds that enable us to be more awake in the midst of everyday chaos. It's a gradual awakening, and it's cumulative. But that's actually what happens. We don't sit in meditation to become good meditators. We sit in meditation so that we'll be more awake in our lives. The first thing that happens in meditation is that we start to see what's happening. Even though we still run away and we still indulge, we see what we're doing clearly. One would think that our seeing as clearly would immediately make it just disappear, but it doesn't. So for quite a long time, we just see it clearly to the degree that we're willing to see our indulging and our repressing clearly. They begin to wear themselves out. Wearing out is not exactly the same as going away. Instead, a wider, more generous, more enlightened perspective arises. How we stay in the middle between indulging and repressing is by acknowledging whatever arises without judgment, letting the thoughts simply dissolve and then go back to the openness of this very moment. That's what we actually are doing in meditation. Up come all these thoughts, but rather than squelch them or obsess with them, we acknowledge them and let them go. Then we come back to just being there. As Songkul Rinpoche puts it, we simply bring our mind back home. After a while, that's how we relate with hope and fear in our daily lives. Out of nowhere, we stop struggling and relax. We stop talking to ourselves and come back to the freshness of the present moment. This is something that evolves gradually, patiently, over time. How long does this process take? I would say it takes the rest of our lives. Basically, we're continually opening further, learning more, connecting further with the depths of human suffering and human wisdom, coming to know both these elements thoroughly and completely, and becoming more loving and compassionate people. And the teachings continue. There's always more to learn. We're not just complacent old fogies who've given up and aren't challenged by anything more. At the most surprising times, we still meet those ferocious dogs. We might think, as we become more open, that it's going to take bigger catastrophes for us to reach our limit. The interesting thing is that as we open more and more, it's the big ones that immediately wake us up and the little things that catch us off guard. However, no matter what the size, color, or shape is, the point is to lean toward the discomfort of life and see it clearly rather than to protect ourselves from it. In practicing meditation, we're not trying to live up to some kind of ideal, quite the opposite. We're just trying to be with our own experience, whatever it is. It's our experience that sometimes we have some kind of perspective and sometimes we have none. Then that's our experience. If sometimes we can approach what scares us and sometimes we absolutely can't, then that's our experience. This very moment is a perfect teacher, and it's always with us. It's really just a profound instruction, just seeing what's going on. That's a teaching right there. We can be with what's happening and not disassociate. Awakeness is found in our pleasure and our pain, our confusion and our wisdom, available in each moment of our weird, unfathomable, ordinary day lives. That's the end of Chapter 3. Chapter 4, from When Things Fall Apart, written by Pema Chodron. Chapter 4's title, Relax as It Is. Once we know this instruction, we can put it into practice. Then it's up to us what happens next. Ultimately, it comes down to the question of just how willing we are to lighten up and loosen our grip. How honest do we want to be with ourselves? The meditation instruction that Trungpa Rinpoche gave to his students is called Shamatha Vipassana meditation. When Trungpa Rinpoche first taught in the West, he told his students to simply open their minds and relax. If thoughts distracted them, they could simply let the thoughts dissolve and just come back to that open, relaxed state of mind. After years, Rinpoche realized that some of the people who came to him found this simple instruction somewhat impossible to do, and they needed a bit more technique in order to proceed. At that point, without really changing the basic intent of the meditation, he nevertheless began to give instructions a bit differently. He put more emphasis on posture and told people to put very light attention on their out-breath. Later he said that the out-breath was as close as you could come to simply resting the mind in its natural open state and still have an object to which to return. He emphasized that it should be just the ordinary out-breath, not manipulated in any way, and that the attention should be soft, a sort of touch-and-go approach. He said that about 25% of the attention should be on the breath, so that one was still aware of one's surroundings and didn't consider them an intrusion or an obstacle to meditation. Years later, he used a humorous analogy comparing a meditator to someone all dressed up in a costume and holding a spoonful of water. One can be happily sitting there in one's fancy costume and still be quite undistracted from the spoonful of water in one's hand. The point was not to try to achieve some special state or to transcend the sounds and movement of ordinary life. Rather, we were encouraged to relax more completely with our environment and to appreciate the world around us and the ordinary truth that takes place in every moment. Most meditation techniques use an object of meditation, something you return to again and again, no matter what's going on in your mind. Through rain, hail, snow, sleet, fair weather, and foul, you simply return to the object of meditation. In this case, the out-breath is the object of meditation, the elusive, fluid, ever-changing out-breath. Ungraspable, and yet continuously arising. When you breathe in, it's like a pause or a gap. There is nothing particular to do except wait for the next out-breath. I once explained this technique to a friend who had spent years doing a very focused concentration on both the in and out breath, as well as another object. When she heard this instruction, she said, "But that's impossible. No one could do this. There's a whole part where there's nothing to be aware of." That was the first time I realized that built right into the instruction with the opportunity of completely letting go. I heard Zen teachers talk of meditation as a willingness to die over and over again. And there it was. As each breath went out and dissolved, there was a chance to die to all that had gone before and to relax instead of panic. Rinpoche asks us, as meditation instructors, not to speak of concentrating on the out-breath, but to use more fluid language. So we would tell students to touch the out-breath and let it go, or to have a light and gentle attention on the out-breath, or be one with the breath as it relaxes outward. The basic guideline was still to open and relax without adding anything extra, without conceptualizing, but to keep returning to the mind just as it is, clear, lucid, and fresh. After some time, Rinpoche added another refinement to the instruction. He began to ask us to label our thoughts, thinking. We'd be sitting there with the out-breath, and before we knew what had happened, we were gone, planning, worrying, fantasizing, completing completely in another world, a world totally made of thoughts. At the point when we realized we'd gone off, we were instructed to say to ourselves, thinking, and without making a big deal, to simply return again to the out-breath. I once saw someone do a dance about this. The dancer came on stage and sat in the meditation posture. In a few seconds, thoughts of passion began to arise. The dancer moved through the process, becoming more and more frenzied, and just a tiny glimpse of passion began to escalate until it was full-blown sexual fantasy. Then a small bell rang, and a calm voice said, thinking, and the dancer relaxed back into the meditation posture. About 5 seconds later, the dance of rage began, again startling as a small irritation, and then exploding more and more wildly. Then came the dance of loneliness, then the dance of drowsiness, and each time the bell would ring, and the voice would say, thinking, and the dancer would simply relax for a little longer, and a little longer, until it became to feel like the immense peace and spaciousness of simply sitting there. Saying thinking is a very interesting point in meditation. It's the point at which we consciously train in gentleness and in developing a non-judgmental attitude. The word for loving kindness in Sanskrit is maitri. Maitri is also translated as unconditional friendliness. So each time you say to yourself, thinking, you are cultivating that unconditional friendliness toward whatever arises in your mind. Since this kind of unconditional compassion is difficult to come by, this simple and direct method for awakening, it is exceedingly precious. Sometimes we feel guilty, sometimes arrogant. Sometimes our thoughts and memories terrify us and make us feel totally miserable. Thoughts go through our minds all the time, and when we sit, we're providing a lot of space for all of them to arise, like clouds in a big sky or waves in a vast sea. All our thoughts are given the space to appear. If one hangs on and sweeps us away, whether we call it pleasant or unpleasant, the instruction is to label it all thinking with as much openness and kindness as we can muster and let it dissolve back into the big sky. When the clouds and waves immediately return, it's no problem. We just acknowledge them again and again with unconditional friendliness, labeling them as just thinking and letting them go again, and again. Sometimes people use meditation to try to avoid bad feelings and disturbing thoughts. We might try to use the labeling as a way to get rid of what bothers us. And if we connect with something blissful or inspiring, we might think we finally got it and try to stay there where it's peace and harmony and nothing to fear. So right from the beginning, it's helpful to always remind yourself that meditation is about opening and relaxing with whatever arises without picking and choosing. It's definitely not meant to repress anything, and it's not intended to encourage grasping either. Allen Ginsberg uses the expression surprise mind. You sit down and wham, a rather nasty surprise arises. Okay, so be with it. This part is not to be rejected, but compassionately acknowledged as thinking and let go. Then wow, a very delicious surprise appears. Okay, so be it. This part is not to be clung to, but compassionately acknowledged as thinking and let go. These surprises are, we find, endless. Milarepa, the 20th century Tibetan yogi, sang wonderful songs about the proper way to meditate. In one song, he says the mind has more projections than there are dust motes in a sunbeam, and that even hundreds of spears couldn't put an end to that. So as meditators, we might as well stop struggling against our thoughts and realize that honesty and humor are far more inspiring and helpful than any kind of solemn religious striving for or against anything. In any case, the point is not to try to get rid of thoughts, but rather to see them, their true nature. Thoughts will run us around in circles if we buy into them, but really they are like dream images. They're like an illusion, not really all that solid. They are, as we say, just thinking. Over the years, Rinpoche continued to refined the instructions on posture. He said it was never a good idea to struggle in meditation. So if our legs or back were hurting, we were told it's fine to move. However, it became clear that by working with proper posture, it was possible to become far more relaxed and settle into one's body by making very subtle adjustments. Large movements brought comfort for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we just wanted to shift again. Eventually, we began following the 6 points of good posture. As a way to really settle down, the 6 points are 1. Seat, 2. Legs, 3. Torso, 4. Hands, 5. Eyes, and 6. Mouth. And the instruction is as follows. 1. Whether sitting on a cushion, on the floor, or in a chair, the seat should be flat, not tilting to the right or left or to the back or front. 2. The legs are crossed comfortably in front of you, or if you're sitting in a chair, the feet are flat on the floor and the knees are a few inches apart. 3. The torso from the head to the seat is upright with a strong back and an open front. If sitting in a chair, it's best not to lean back. If you start to slouch, simply sit upright again. 4. The hands are open with palms down, resting on the thighs. 5. The eyes are open, indicating the attitude of remaining awake and relaxed with all that occurs. The eye gaze is slightly downward and directed about 4 to 6 feet in front. 6. The mouth is very slightly open so the jaw is relaxed and air can move easily through both mouth and nose. The tip of the tongue can be placed on the roof of the mouth. Each time you sit down to meditate, you can run through these 6 points, and anytime you feel distracted during your meditation, you can bring your attention back to the body and run through the 6 points. Then with the sense of starting afresh, return once again to the out-breath. If you find that thoughts have carried you away, don't worry about it. Simply say to yourself, thinking, and come back to the openness and relaxation of the out-breath. Again and again, just come back to being right where you are. In the beginning, people find sometimes this meditation exciting. It's like a new project, and you think that if you do it, perhaps all the unwanted stuff will go away and you'll become open, non-judgmental, and unconditionally friendly. But after a while, the sense of project wears out, and you just find time each day, and you sit down with yourself. You come back to that breath over and over through boredom, edginess, fear, and well-being. This perseverance and repetition, when done with honesty and a light touch, humor, and kindness, is its own reward. Once we know this instruction, we can put it into practice. Then it's up to us what happens next. Ultimately, it comes down to the question of just how willing we are to lighten up and loosen our grip. How honest do we want to be with ourselves? And this ends chapter 4. Namaste.